Okay, when were you born?
March 7, 1916. That part I know.
Where were you born?
I don't know it.
You were born here in Denver.
Where?
Denver. Maybe I ought to leave. He's
No, stay there, Suze.
No, it's okay.
You
We'll be
might be able to answer some question, but I've forgotten so much, Suze. Yeah, I was born in Denver.
Okay. So where did you go to school?
Where did I go to school?
Yeah, just grew up.
Originally at what was known as the Hilltop School. Hilltop is 2 words, and that's about 8 miles southeast of Parker, if you know where Parker is. There's a cut across road that goes from between Parker and Elizabeth. Instead of going to Franktown, I'm on the Hilltop Road. It's called Hilltop Road.
Okay, I didn't get your name. What's your name?
Lennart Wallden.
That's a different name.
It is. It's a Swedish name. My dad came from Sweden. My dad was born and raised in Sweden. My mom was Swedish descent, but she was raised in this country.
That's great. Let's just jump ahead here. And how did you wind up in service in World War II?
I was drafted to start with, yes. I'd been in business with my brother. I was a postmaster, and we had a grocery store, and well, we operated 7 trucks. We had quite a business going, and Uncle Sam says, "You're next." So my brother was stuck with it from then on.
So you just had to go off and, or just go into the Army at that time?
Just the Army at that time. I was drafted into the Army, and well, I don't even remember quite all the places I was at. And finally, they decided that they needed more people. It was the Army Air Corps at that time. It was a division of the Army. And I couldn't get into it because I only had a high school education. But after a while, they used them all up and decided we need more guys, so they let me in there if I passed that test, which I was fortunate and did. And you know how I passed the test? Because there was probably 1,000 questions there. That's exaggerating. There was a lot of questions there. And here I've been in the service, I haven't even seen a paper or anything for months, and they asked all kinds of current questions in there. And I finally got disgusted and answered the ones only that I knew. And that's what I found out later. Every time you didn't guess, if you guessed at something, they'd figure it out. And they don't want any guesswork, so if you didn't answer a question, you was better off.
So there you were.
That's the way things work, though.
What kind of training did you go into then for the Army Air Corps?
Well, in the Army Air Corps, originally I flew the, oh shucks, what's the name of it? The twin double wing.
Stedman.
The what?
The Stedman.
The Stearman, yeah. Yeah, the Stearman. I couldn't remember that name right all of a sudden. Stearman.
But you hadn't flown before.
That was, I'd never even been in an airplane before. No. And you know, when you got into service, you spent about 6 months in school, more or less. Then finally getting that open cockpit Stearman. I'd never been in an airplane before. But I can't remember, not too many hours, I was a pilot. They knew how to train people.
They must have felt that you had the aptitude then to become a pilot.
I guess so, and of course our country was advancing so fast at that time, as you realize that they're getting prepared for a big war, and they did it fast. Yeah, we've got a country you can be proud of.
Did you go ahead then and go right into flying 4-engine aircraft, or did you kind of graduate to some other?
I graduated up, yeah. Single engine, twin engine, and finally the 4-engine. And I trained mostly in the B-24. And in fact, I'd never been in a 17 until I got overseas, to be honest with you. But if you know anything about airplanes, if you can fly the 24, you can definitely fly the 17. It's a much easier plane to fly, the 4-engine planes.
Where were you in England?
At Lavingham to start with. That's out of London, about 12, 20 miles, something like that. And yeah, Lavingham was the name of it. It was a small town there.
What was your bomb group?
487th Bomb Group.
And how soon did they get you going on getting into actual combat after you got over to England?
That I don't think I can give you a true answer on. I think in a matter of 3 months. It wasn't too long, that is, because you went, I imagine those figures are in my book. I don't remember.
But you had time to train a little bit in B-17 then.
Oh, yes. I trained in this, well, I trained in the B-24, to tell the truth about it, to start with. I was not in a 17, like I told you before. I trained in the B-24. It's a bigger and much faster. It's a 220-mile-an-hour airspeed where the 17's 170. So it's a bigger and faster airplane. It's quite a different airplane than the 17.
Oh,
There's a lot of old pilots like myself left there, are there not? Because I was one of the older ones. In fact, I was almost too old to age limit. I was past the age limit, in other words, when I actually got in it. But they were wanting them so bad and so fast that they let us go in even if we were too old. And I was too old when I went first training.
how old were you then?
I think it had to be 21. I'm not, and I'm just guessing on these figures. But anyhow, I was too old because I lost track of the years. But
Well, that's understandable. That's been back a while.
it's
So,
been back a while. Yeah, I knew this was coming up. I should have checked a couple of things, shouldn't I? So
oh, this will be fine. We're in good shape. When you actually started flying B-17s in England, were you assigned a crew that you stuck with for a long time then?
yes, yes, I was the airplane commander. I mean, and I had a co-pilot, and navigator, and bombardier, and there was 10 or 11 in the crew to start with.
Can you tell us just a little bit about some of the missions you flew in the B-17?
Gee, well, most of mine was over Germany, naturally, but I also bombed in Italy once, and I also bombed in Norway. Believe it or not, I dropped bombs in Norway, and I can tell you why. That's where they were about to make the atomic bomb. And I don't think they expected us to come back from that mission, because that place was heavily guarded. But we did make it, and we made it back.
What kind of interference did you run into? A lot of fighter planes?
Fighter planes, yes. They had the Me-210s, which was a twin-engine airplane they had against us. And then they had their normal one, golly, I've forgotten the name of it even.
190s?
The what?
190s?
No, they had
The ME-109s.
109?
Me-109s and the Me-110s too.
What about anti-aircraft? Was there an awful lot of anti-aircraft?
Oh, yes. You mean anti-aircraft guns now?
Mhm.
Yeah, it'd blacken the sky around you. They could get up to, we could get above them sometimes. But no, they'd get you at 18,000 feet easy. They'd put it up there. And they'd put it up there seeing it'd explode after it got up there. You could hear it hit the sides of your airplanes once in a while, some of the flak, because that's what it did. It exploded and just spent pieces of metal all around you. That's what brought the airplanes down a lot. But I was fortunate. I'd have to look at my book, which I probably should have done. If you lost one engine, you wasn't hurt too bad. You still had 3.
Did you lose an engine?
Oh, yes. And it wasn't too bad if you lost one, but if you lost your turbocharger, then you had trouble at the altitude. Fortunately, in England, as you know, you're pretty near sea level. There's a big difference between flying an airplane here and in England, a propeller airplane. I suppose the jets too, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
See, we're already mile high here, so in England, they're sea level almost.
So you were better by the time you got back to England to land. You
Oh, yeah.
Losing turbochargers, you were all right then.
Yeah.
There was
Yeah.
one time you didn't make it back.
Now that's right. One time
No,
I
you crashed.
I ended up in Norway, back as far as Norway, but they repaired my airplane a little bit. I was able to get it off the ground with only three engines and get back to England.
Where did you land when you came down? Just what kind of a field, or?
Oh yeah, there was airfields. I don't think I ever had to land in a pasture. I've had to land beside the runway a time or two because I had no choice. You had to do it right the first time because you were about out of fuel. And of course, if there's another airplane there, and at one time, one of them stayed there and they kept throwing the red lights at me not to come in. See, well, I just told them we're going down whether they want us to or not. If the airplane gets on the runway, we'll land beside it. But he stood his ground and I used the runway.
How many sorties did you fly?
33. You were expected to do 25, I did 33.
How'd you happen to do all the extra?
Well, they wanted, it was pretty much a volunteer after your 25 was up. But they wanted to cruise up there. So they had the airplanes and so they asked us to continue, which we did do. All my crew members were with me.
That's good. So you did keep your crew together.
Oh yes.
He also was
The what, Susan?
a group, he was the commander of the group.
Oh, the 47th Bomb Group, 836 Squadron. 4 squadrons in a group.
And you were head of the group?
No, only of the particular squadron. I was the main leader of the group a number of times, but that would be on certain missions.
Still, that's amazing. Were you losing a lot of airplanes from your squadrons and from your bomb group going over?
Well, there's 36 in the group, and if you fly 30 missions, say, there ain't many left, is there? If you only lost one at a time. And very seldom you come back that at least one airplane wasn't lost. So I was very fortunate. I was one of very few that made that many missions and still came out of it. And like I told you, I bombed Norway once.
How did that go? Were you successful and knocked out that?
Yes, that trip over Norway had a lot to do with the turn of the war, because they were about to get the jet planes in, see?
But they knew that they had to protect themselves and try to protect their base.
They did. They had some good airplanes. They did a good job of protecting themselves, that's for sure.
On the Norway mission, was that facility? I've been to Norway and I kind of know what it's
have you?
like.
Uh-huh.
Was that in the mountains? Was that a hard target to reach?
It wasn't too hard right at that particular point, but I know what you say. My dad came from Sweden, and I've been back there with my dad, and we went into Norway a little bit. They're closest, you know. But that was the only time I was actually in Norway. And I can't even remember the name of but we did have a field there in Norway, and I managed to get it.
Boy, how many planes? Was that a full 36 that went into Norway with you?
The full.
36 planes?
Normally that was about what it would be, yeah. Yeah.
How long were a lot of these bombing raids? How long were you out?
Up to 16 hours. Yeah, that's a long time. And later on, I didn't get in on that much. Later on, though, they could be longer than that because they refuel in air. I did not ever do that. But later on, they got into the jets, you know, that ate up more fuel and all, naturally. They had to be refueled. And they'd refuel in the air.
On your flights, it was really cold, wasn't it?
Oh, golly, yes. It was way below zero. However, I was never cold, especially the pilot. You had an electric suit that you wore, even your coveralls. You just plug it into the side and you had electric heat. Because of the pilot. Now the other crew, see, they could wear them good big heavy all-wool jackets. Well, if you're looking at an airplane, you don't have a chance of wearing that heavy stuff. There's not that much room. So the pilot and the co-pilot they got electric suits. In other words, you'd plug it in and it was heated by electricity. You had a little controller.
Have you flown in a B-17 since you came back from the war?
Yes, I was in one. One was about last summer sometime. I went up in one. And I was kind of amazed. Susie and her husband there, they were sitting on the floor close to the tail end of it, and I was sitting in the navigator's seat. But I thought maybe he'd let me sit in the co-pilot seat, but he wouldn't do it.
Did that bring back some memories?
Oh, it sure did. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, I've seen the airplane a number of times, you know, at the air shows. But you didn't get to get in them hardly, as far as that goes.
The B-17 has a distinctive sound to it, doesn't it, with the engines?
Oh, it does, yes. And so does the 24 have a sound of its own. The 24 is quite a bit bigger airplane than the 17. But I wasn't sorry to get the 17. The 24 couldn't take as much punishment, or at least that's what they always tell me. It couldn't stand as much punishment as the 17. And the 17, if you lost one engine, it didn't bother you too much. It'd still fly pretty good.
Was your plane shot up quite a bit on some of the missions when you came back?
I think in my book, I'm not sure,
Yes.
that there was 110 holes in the airplane after I come back through the airplane.
Yes, there is a.
Am I right, Susan? That number, I think, is correct. 110 holes.
How about your crew? Did you lose any crewmen?
No, I never lost any. I got few. I had a little, one of my thumbs had a bunch of shrapnel in it and all. But as a pilot, I was very fortunate.
Have you gotten together with any of your crew members at reunions?
Oh, well, I get together with my Randy, my tail gunner. He's the one that gets together most time. Most pilots thought they were too good for the tail gunner. No, I liked my tail gunner. I liked all my crew. I had a good crew.
They were pretty important to keep you going, weren't they?
You bet they were. I wouldn't have been here today if it wasn't for a good crew.
Were the guys on your crew, were they good gunners when the fighters were coming in?
I thought they were pretty good. And of course, you realize that there was precautions there too. You could easily shoot down one of your own airplanes when you're in tight formation. So your crewmen had to be pretty cautious when they started firing that machine gun. Don't want to shoot your own people down.
Which did happen.
It did happen. It did happen too. Yeah, it did happen, unfortunately.
Well, you were flying tight formations too, weren't you?
Yes. And we usually flew tight formations until at bomb drop, then we split up because you're better off being away from the rest of them. The enemy can't, now they only got one plane they can pick on.
So you kind of spread out so they couldn't come in
Yeah.
with 2 or 3 of you at one
That's
time.
right. Spread out and covered a lot of area, seeing, and their fighters can only stay up so long. They're limited, you know. And the more spread out we are, the less target that the fighter's going to get at with us.
Did you start to worry after you'd flown, say, 15 or 20 missions and you were getting close to what that 25 mission limit was?
That never did bother me, because you just knew you was assigned to do a job, and you did it, or tried to.
We have heard that so much from you guys that were over there, that there was a job to be done. It just amazes people, and this is what people need to know.
Well, I guess it was kind of unusual.
It was a war that everybody went and fought because they really believed.
Well, I think that's 90% of it. Everybody, every one of us who was in there knew that this had to be done, that we were doing the right thing.
You flew an awful lot of missions. Was there any other mission that stands out besides the Norway mission? One that was
Well, if I look through my book, I can place different ones that I was more concerned about. But normally, each one was pretty much alike, except a different target, naturally.
what kind of weather did you run into?
Oh, a lot of it. A lot of it. You'd take off, and you know, in England, it's foggy all the time. When you took off, you had no idea where there's 36 of you in that one group. You take off and you fly, and you fly your certain pattern that you're supposed to fly in. And if everybody belongs where they belong, when you break up out of those clouds, there's a whole sea of clouds just below you. Airplanes popping up by the hundreds. That's how many took off from England. And you knew if it was two red flares, that was your main, that's what you looked for. If it was two red flares, and of course that changed too, the lead plane, which I was in sometimes, would fire those rockets, you know. And if it was a red or red-green or something, that's the one you're supposed to get in with. Because there's several groups, and there's 36 in each group. They take off from different places out of England. And yet we all get together up there. It's amazing.
Did you have to fly around and circle a long time for all these planes to get in the air?
Yes.
And form?
Yeah. The head person would fly a round circle, and of course you knew the flare you're looking for was red or red green or something. That's the guy you got to home in on. And you just had he made a big circle, and you could make a tighter circle to catch up with him.
Did that take quite a while at times to get together?
I think we spent up to half an hour to an hour just getting together after we're up in the air. Because he would take off at, heck, the middle of the night. And later on, in later shows, they did air refueling. I imagine her husband had some of that, didn't he? Fueled in the air. We never did.
With that kind of thing, we see in the movies, it's all just such a different world. You've seen World War II movies about
Yeah.
B-17s. What do you think of those?
Well, some of them pretty good, but for the most part, they're movies. Yeah,
It was propaganda at the time.
it was. It was some, but
I was trying to think of, did you stay in service after the war, or did you get out?
no, I got out after, I don't remember how long it took, but after we got back to England, and then back to the States, I got out. In fact, I didn't get back to the States. I came home in a boat. I went overseas. I went overseas on the Queen Elizabeth at that time. That's how I got from New York over to France, over to England rather, on the Queen Elizabeth. That was a great ship in this day. They had all boarded up with narrow plywood, you know, to keep the, oh boy, you'd peek underneath that and talk about wonderful woodwork. Oh boy. I'd like to see that thing later on. It would have been something. Because you could peek through the cracks once in a while and see that polished hardwood. Oh, beautiful.
And Daddy, why don't you tell them about how you flew the dignitaries
The which,
after the war, the dignitaries that you flew over the camps?
oh yeah, after I did make 7 trips after the war was over, taking the personnel, you know, that had been in London. In fact, I flew General LeMay more than once, just on a trip to look things over.
Where were you flying on these trips? Where did you fly them?
Over all of France and Italy and Europe, and all over Europe, Switzerland, And I had to land in Norway, like I say, one time. But all those countries, yeah, you got to know them pretty well that time.
Why'd you have to land in Norway?
There was not much choice. He was going to be running out of fuel pretty soon. He already had one dead engine and only two with superpower. Supercharged is what I should say. Yeah.
So you landed. How did you get fuel then?
They complained and bitched at me something terrible. Did you give me a few gallons of fuel? But I finally coaxed them. They said, well, you can't take off. You can't get that airplane in the air. I said, well, I got it down. I can get it in the air if you just let me have some fuel. And they did. So we took off. Yeah, got back to England. That was your job, Deb, to do what you could.
You must have been quite a pilot. I would think if you're landing at a place like that and getting back out, and they were worried.
I guess I was pretty good, and I'd never been in an airplane before that. My co-pilot owned his own plane, but yet I was a pilot and he was a co-pilot. That must tell you, somebody along the line must have figured I was better than him as a pilot. I don't know. Maybe I was just lucky too.
You have no idea how many people we've interviewed that wound up in the infantry that tried to get in the Army Air Corps later on.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's where I was lucky, see, on a high school education, but that was when we were expanding so fast that if you could read and write almost, you could get in there. Later on, and most of the time, it wasn't that easy. You had to have a college education, finally 2 years of college. I had none of that.
Have you flown since you got out of the military?
Oh, yes. I owned my own airplane for a number of years. I lived close to a farm. And of course, I was a postmaster of a little country store. And Susie'd remember that. I used to fly the guy around. It was one of the commissioners in the county, see. And so I come home one day and there's a bunch of Caterpillar tractors out there making me a new runway right by my house.
So you enjoyed flying even afterward then?
Yes, I flew quite a bit afterwards.
What kind of plane did you have then?
Cessna. I had a 2-place, and then I had a 4-place. Yeah, I think Susie would remember some flights that we made. Yeah, we flew to Wisconsin, Minnesota. Flew a few times.
How long did you fly? When did you stop flying?
Gee, that's a good question. Maybe Susie can answer that.
But it was quite a while.
Yeah, probably. He's 90 now. But
Really?
I think he probably stopped flying when he was about 50 or 60.
60 at least, I think.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah, I was fortunate. Yeah, I'd come home and get my own airplane and own runway. Well, I had 2 different runways. It was a rather short one that my daughter knows about, right close to my home. Then out in the pasture, my dad and my parents lived in a big two sections of land. And fortunately, a brother-in-law of mine was a road maintainer, you know. And one weekend, for some reason or other, that it got lost and chopped out all those soapweeds. That you couldn't land them full of soapweeds in the pastures. And he sort of removed them. So I was fortunate.
You had a couple of questions that came up when looking at the book there. Let's just go over a couple of those points, just
My question?
or just what you had noticed there as far as what about the footlockers?
Okay. Yeah, Daddy, they were talking about the foot lockers being packed. If you didn't get back in time, they pack your foot lockers
Yes.
to send them. Did that happen to you?
Yes, it did. Came home and there was all my clothes and everything all in my footlocker, ready to be sent home.
How come yours was packed?
Well, we'd been shot clear out of formation, and we're in a spin. The rest of the airplane crews decided that we were lost and downed in Germany. But we managed to right the airplane and land in Norway and get home on our own.
Didn't you tell me that you had to crash land in Holland once?
No, up in
You always said
Norway.
Holland.
well, in Holland, I was there, but that was afterwards. It had nothing to do with.
It looks like you went to Bremen a lot.
Yes, that was part of the headquarters. Had a lot to do with the enemy.
Evidently, it was pretty heavily
Oh, it was,
guarded.
yes, it was very, very heavily guarded.
Because here's when you said a 190 was coming right at you.
The 190 is one of their airplane
Missed you by
fighters.
inches.
Yeah, that was their fighter, main fighter plane.
What about the Newburgh oil dumps?
Mm-hmm. That was, the oil supply. Naturally, that's critical. So we wanted to wipe it out so they wouldn't be able to get it.
You told me last night that Bremen was the most dangerous place in the world.
I
'Cause
don't
they
know.
didn't like you there.
They didn't know. They guarded it more than the other towns. It must have had some significance that I don't even know about.
I see once you bombed Berlin.
Oh yes, I think more than once.
And Dresden?
Dresden is right next to the Russian border, beyond Berlin. And Berlin is not too far from Russia, everywhere across Germany.
And also I see Essen was one of the places.
Yes.
Now I see in here that you flew a B-24E, an AT-24, a B-24J, and an RB-24E, and an AT-24A. They're all 24s, but they all have different
Different
numbers.
models of that particular airplane.
So they were alike.
Pretty much. Mike could tell you that stuff as well as I could.
Did you always drop all your bombs?
I think one time we had to bring them back. It must be in there. I know I had to bring them back.
Actually, it was Hamburg. It says we had
Is
11
that what-
bombs hang up on us,
Yeah.
and Bruce was too busy firing against fighters, so we had to bring them back.
Mm-hmm. Bruce Hampton was my engineer.
This one here at Royan, you had,
Ryan.
Huh?
The Ryan Airworks or something.
Mm-hmm. It says you dropped napalm
Napalm.
bombs.
Firebomb. Set them on fire. Hoping they had fuel tanks down there or something.
And your next mission, you went back there, and it says back to high altitude again. We could watch the big guns of the Navy shelling the same target. What a sight. So can you tell us about that mission?
Well, that'd be from coming back from most any mission. See, there's water between England and Europe all the time.
You talked about the fire bombs. Did you ever, were you involved with Dresden firebombing?
Yes, 2 or 3 times. It's in that book somewhere.
Tell us.
Dresden was one of the hardest. That was one of their most guarded cities. It was a very hard city to bomb. They didn't like us over there.
Was that towards the very end of the war?
Well, no, it wasn't towards the end, but it was at the later part anyway that we went to hit Dresden.
When you came back with the bombs hung up in your airplane, in your bomber, what was it like? How worried were you about getting down the ground and having a problem with those bombs?
Well, it wasn't too worried, just didn't want to make too rough a landing just in case. But they hung up on us, and the crew worked and worked, couldn't get them to drop for some reason.
What would the crew have to do if a bomb hung up in the bomb bay? What would they have to do to get it out?
Well, if it got loose from its moorings, naturally it was away from the airplane. If I understand what your question is.
How were the bombs loaded in the planes? Was it machinery that put them in?
Oh yeah, they had all the ground personnel did that. I don't know a whole lot about it. Sure, I know how they did it.
Are they heavy?
Oh yeah, 300 pounds. Some of them.
Did you fly the same plane all the time, or did you have different planes?
That's a good question. No, I certainly did not fly the same one. Most of the time, it wasn't fit to fly the next day. It had to have a bunch of patches put in it. I believe I think I flew seven different airplanes.
Actually, you flew more than 7.
Yeah.
Trying to count how many.
The ground crews that had to fix the damage on these planes,
Mm-hmm.
they had to be pretty miraculous with how they could rebuild them or
Oh,
salvage them.
You bet. And in those days, little tri-wheel carts that they could push around, to lift an engine out of the airplane and all. Yeah, they were good.
I see that you flew 18 different kinds of planes during the course of your military career, according to your logbooks.
That's got to be right.
And after the war, didn't you tell me that you took dignitaries over to the concentration camps so that they could see what was going on there?
Yes, I believe it's in there. I think I made about 7 trips after the war was over, just there, taking our military personnel that wanted to see some of that stuff.
Do you remember at the end of the war when you were flying the dignitaries around, do you remember going to the concentration camps?
Yes. Buchenwald, I believe, was one of the big ones. I think I flew over it 2 or 3 times with different Army personnel, different generals and such that had been on the ground forces,
Did you actually land there?
Oh no, never. Just flew over them, they took pictures or did what they wanted to. And of course then we fly at lower altitude, you understand, 500 feet or 1,000 feet above instead of up there at 30 and 40,000.
What could you see if you were flying at that altitude over a place like Buchenwald?
You could see the city quite clearly. Sometimes we bombed many times when it was cloud cover and you didn't even see what you didn't see. It was all done by radar or what they called radar at that time.
Did you have any idea at the time what a concentration camp was or what Buchenwald really meant at that point?
Well, you only knew that if you was going to bomb Buchenwald, you wanted to hit your target and not miss it, because if you missed it, you might be killing your own people. But yes, you wanted to knock a barrier down or something and turn those guys loose, and it did happen.
So you did know what a concentration camp
Oh,
was?
sure. Sure. You wanted to get loose those guys to get out there. They wanted to.
But you never saw one from the ground, did you?
No. No, I don't know much about that.
Were you able to hear what some of the generals and some of the dignitaries were saying after they'd seen Buchenwald and the concentration camps?
A little bit, not a whole lot. We always had critique. Critique, they called it. Where they would question the whole crew of what different crew members saw. And by, say, 36 different airplanes and 36 different crews being interrogated, they could piece them all together and get a pretty good picture of what had happened. Get different view from a great many different people.
some of the guys that flew over later would see a different picture than those in the lead planes then. They could actually see where the bombs were hitting.
Oh yes, I made 13 trips, I think it was, later on. And I think it's in my book there. It shows a little bit of how some of those cities looked after we bombed them.
When you were on the ground in England, how long were you between flights?
You
Between
mean,
the time that you arrived back in England and the next time you had to leave?
next day you mean, or?
Is that what it was? Was a day?
Sometimes, yeah. It's in that book. There's some 2 or 3 times I think there's only a day. I think one time I flew 3 days in a row. But most of the time you had several days off after you'd been on a mission. That's why the date's on each one of those that's in there.
Didn't you get tired?
You don't think of that when you're that busy. There's no time to get worried about being tired. As Mike could tell you, you're the wheel and you got all those other 12 guys that you're responsible for. You don't sleep.
We got one different question here. Tell us about, did you have a date with Dinah Shore?
That was, yes, when I was in California.
You said that you were an escort for Dinah Shore.
That's true.
Was that just once or several times?
I think just once. I'd met her more than once, but I think it was only once that I escorted her.
And how did that come about that they needed an escort for her?
That's a good question. Don't know as I know.
Was she performing with USO shows over there?
Yes, she was. A lot of the Hollywood people put on shows,
Did you get to see a lot of USO shows over there?
European shows.
USO?
USO shows. Did you see a lot?
Oh, some, not a whole lot. There were a lot of them, yes, but you didn't have time to. In other words, if you just got back from a flight, you were more interested in getting rested up. But yes, the USO was very active and they did a very good job, as far as I'm concerned.
Is there anything else there in the book that you have run across that we need to ask about?
Not that I can think of offhand.
Okay.
Well, of course, we ate, not to change it, but we, as an officer, you know, and an enlisted man, you ate what was put in front of you. As an officer, you could order your own meals, pretty much.
Hadn't heard that before.
Oh, you never asked him what his rank was, did you?
No, we didn't.
What was your rank?
Well, I ended up as a first lieutenant.
Did you ever consider staying in the military at all?
No,
You had a business to
I had a
run.
business at home.